The golden light of Manhattan's late afternoon sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Bryant Tower, casting long, graceful shadows across the gleaming marble floor. At the top of this skyscraper, where the world below looked like a toy city, and the clouds painted gentle streaks in the sky, the office of Dylan Bryant sat untouched by the noise of the streets. It was serene cold, perfect like its owner. Dylan stood by the window, his tailored navy suit hugging his frame, with an effortless elegance. In one hand, he held a glass of scotch, neat as always, and in the other, his phone where a message from Sabrina Lowe blinked with a notification. Sabrina. Can we meet again tonight? I miss you already. He didn't respond. Not because he was guilt-ridden, not because he was conflicted, but because he had become too skilled at separating his lives, too adept at orchestrating two realities that never collided, at least not yet. The elevator chimed. He turned, casually setting down the glass. The soft steps of heels followed the chime, and a voice like the melody of autumn winds echoed through the space. Dylan, are you busy? Love, Stella. Griffin walked into the room like sunlight warming winter marble. Her caramel brown skin glowed against her crisp white coat, and she carried a thermos in her hands. It's freezing outside, she said gently, so I thought you might want some soup. I made chicken and wild rice your favorite. He smiled, the kind of smile television actors master, warm, effortless, convincing. You didn't have to do that, sweetheart, he said, taking the thermos. That's what the staff is for. Stella shook her head with a slight chuckle, placing her gloves on the table. I don't mind. I wanted to do this myself. He watched her. Her every movement was graceful, honest, and loving. And something unfamiliar stirred in him, a flicker of unease. But he pushed it away, like he had for the past 3 months. Dylan said you always go out of your way for me, brushing a strand of curls from her face. What did I do to deserve you? Her eyes. Those deep pools of warmth sparkled with sincerity. You saved me, remember back at Yale when I fainted on the library steps. You were the only one who stopped to help. That moment changed everything. He nodded slowly. He remembered. Or at least he remembered the version he had chosen to keep. But before more words could pass between them, a soft, rustling noise came from the hallway, too soft for most to hear. But Stella paused. Are you alone? She asked, her tone light, but her brows knitting ever so slightly. Dylan turned smoothly, expertly. Yes. Just me. Jenkins dropped off some papers earlier. She didn't question him. She never did. That was Stella's tragedy, her unshakable trust. Dylan continued, setting the thermos down, and I was about to surprise you. Stella's eyes lit up. A surprise. He reached into his desk and pulled out a sleek black envelope. Inside, an invitation gleamed in silver foil. Skyline 360, Rooftop Lounge. Tonight, 7:00 p.m. A private celebration in honor of Stella Griffin. For your birthday, Dylan said. I rented out the entire rooftop. There's a 7-course dinner, live jazz, and a sky full of fireworks. She looked up at him, stunned. Dylan, this is unbelievable. He smiled. That perfect smile again. You deserve it all. She kissed his cheek and held the invitation close to her chest. I should go home and get ready then. Wait, he said. There's a dress waiting for you at Cloudview Atelier. It was designed just for you. Go there first. They'll know what to do. She blinked, overwhelmed. You really planned all this? Of course. Just finish up there. Get dressed and I'll meet you tonight. She reached up and caressed his face. I love you, Dylan. I love you too. She left her heels clicking softly against the floor until the door closed. Dylan stood still for a moment. Then he turned to the closet door on the room's far end. He opened it. Inside, Sabrina stood fixing her lipstick. "That was close," she whispered. "You should have stayed quiet," Dylan muttered, shutting the door. She laughed softly, stepping out with feline grace. "Come on. That was thrilling. Don't tell me you didn't enjoy it." He said nothing, but his lips found hers with a hunger that betrayed the truth. The night sky over Manhattan looked like a silk canvas pierced by stars. From the rooftop of Skyline 360, the city twinkled like a universe of its own. Stella stood by the glass railing dressed in a sapphire blue gown that clung to her like a whispered promise. Around her, soft jazz floated through the air, candles flickered in crystal holders, and servers moved like shadows, silent and graceful. Mrs. Bryant said, "The maitre d' the cake has arrived." An 18-layer chocolate creation, each layer symbolizing a month of their marriage. A hush fell over the terrace. The lights dimmed. From behind the bar, Dylan appeared in a crisp tuxedo, holding a crown inlaid with pale diamonds and vintage emeralds. This, he announced, belonged to Queen Anne of York. "But tonight, it belongs to my queen." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Stella blinked in disbelief. "Dylan, this is too much." He placed the crown gently on her head. "Nothing is too much for you." Then the fireworks began. A million sparks lit up the night, mirrored in Stella's eyes. She smiled, and for a moment it felt real. But not for long. Stella sat in their penthouse kitchen, stirring her coffee slowly. Something felt off. The afterglow of last night hadn't lasted. There was a hollowness in Dylan's words, an echo of rehearsed affection. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "He was with me at the office yesterday. You deserve the truth. S." She stared at the message. A strange calm settled over her. She picked up Dylan's suit jacket from the chair, reached into the inner pocket. A lipstick-stained napkin. Not hers. She smiled sadly. The illusion had cracked. Donovan Mercer closed his notebook at a cozy cafe in the Upper West Side. He'd been sketching again portraits of strangers' moments in ink. A drawing of Stella sitting alone in the rain was tucked in the center. He looked out the window and whispered more to himself than anyone else. "I wonder if she knows she deserves more." The late October breeze traced its fingers through the open windows of the Bryant penthouse, carrying the subtle perfume of autumn, smoky crisp and faintly melancholic. The golden hues of Central Park below were beginning to fade into copper, the leaves curling inward like secrets kept too long. Stella Griffin stood in the walk-in closet, her hand resting on a silk scarf Dylan had gifted her the previous Christmas. It still smelled like cedarwood and something softer beneath an unfamiliar note of sweetness. Not hers. She closed her eyes. The message from the night before, unsigned, sharp and chilling in its certainty, had not left her mind. Nor had the napkin, nor the lipstick, not her shade. Everything was so meticulously staged in their world. The dinners, the public appearances, the affectionate smiles caught by lenses. But this was raw. It was real. And it was uninvited. She stepped out of the closet down the hallway and into the open-concept living room where Dylan had left his briefcase on the console table. Stella had never opened it before. Until now. With steady hands, she flipped the lock. It clicked too easily, like it had been waiting for her. Inside folders, contracts, a velvet box empty, and a boarding pass. Her eyes narrowed. Bryant D. Departure. JFK. Milan. Date. 3 weeks ago. Dylan had told her he had a meeting in Boston that day. She had believed him. Why would he lie about something so specific? The Milan trip wasn't the fruit, because liars build small lies around big ones, like thorns around fruit. It was a seed. She picked up the boarding pass and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, glittering and proud. So many lives move in parallel, and so many couples hold hands below her, just like she and Dylan had once done. A knock on the door startled her. She turned sharply. "Good morning, Mrs. Bryant," said the doorman, a kind older man named Charlie. "A package arrived for you, but there was no return address." Stella took the box with a faint smile. "Thank you, Charlie." She waited until he left before she shut the door gently and placed the package on the dining table. It was wrapped in plain brown paper tied with a green ribbon, a strange touch of softness. Inside a single photo. Dylan. Sabrina. In a hotel lobby in Milan. He wasn't touching her, not obviously, but his gaze, the angle of his body. It spoke volumes to anyone who had loved a man long enough to know what silence looks like when it wants. Her breath caught, not because it hurt, but it confirmed what she already suspected. And yet she felt nothing. Not yet, Mrs. Bryant. Stella turned her heels, echoing against the marble floors of the corporate lobby. A young receptionist greeted her with reverence. "Mr. Bryant isn't in today," the girl said, slightly flustered. "He flew out to Washington for a board meeting." "Washington, of course." "That's all right," Stella replied smoothly, her smile patient. "I came to drop off lunch. He left this morning in such a hurry." The receptionist brightened. "That's very kind of you. I'll make sure it gets to him." "No need. I know the way." Her voice was calm, unyielding, like silk pulled taut. The elevator carried her to the 56th floor, his private suite. The glass doors opened with a familiar chime. And there, sitting behind Dylan's desk, was Sabrina Lowe. "Stella." Sabrina said, startled, then quickly composed herself. What a surprise. Stella walked in without invitation. Her gaze scanned the room. No Dylan. No assistant. Just the two of them. "You're using his office now." Sabrina stood. "He asked me to handle a few files while he's away." Stella looked at the desk, a coffee cup still warm, lipstick smudged on the rim. "You've become indispensable," she murmured. Sabrina met her gaze. Bold. Dangerous. "He trusts me." A pause. Heavy. Electric. Stella stepped closer. "So did I." The words cut sharper than a slap. Sabrina flinched. Briefly. Sabrina said, "You think you know him," voice trembling behind the veil of confidence. "But men like Dylan, they get bored." Stella tilted her head. "And women like you mistake convenience for love." She set down the lunchbox she had never intended to give Dylan. "Bon appetit," she said, and walked away. Stella didn't return home. Instead, she stood on the balcony of a quiet apartment in Chelsea, a space she hadn't used in over a year. A sanctuary once, before the marriage, before the diamonds. She wore a soft cashmere sweater, her curls tied loosely, no makeup, no mask. Just Stella. Behind her, Donovan Mercer set down 2 mugs of tea. Chamomile. He said, his voice low and warm, "Unless you've changed preferences." She turned slightly. Their eyes met. "You remembered." He offered a faint smile. "Some things are worth remembering." They stood in silence. The air between them pulsed with unspoken things. Donovan took a sip, then leaned against the railing beside her. "You don't have to tell me anything, but I know that look in your eyes. The look you only get when someone you love starts to feel like a stranger." Stella lowered her gaze. Have you ever watched someone you trusted become someone you fear to understand? He didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. She looked up. And what did you do? Donovan exhaled. I let them go. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I realized love shouldn't feel like drowning. Stella closed her eyes. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was familiar. A shared breath. A safe space. I could forgive him anything she said. But now I'm not sure if I'm mourning a betrayal or the woman I used to be before I married him. Donovan turned to her, his voice gentle but steady. You don't have to choose. Maybe both deserve to be mourned. That night, Stella opened her laptop for the first time in weeks. Her inbox was overflowing, but one message stood out, from Ji Chen. Subject reposition at Lexington Law International. She clicked it open. Ms. Griffin, we would still be honored to have you join us as a senior litigation strategist. Your previous victories speak for themselves. If you're ready, we are too. Stella stared at the screen. For the first time in months, her pulse stirred not from fear or grief, but from purpose. She began typing. Dear Mr. Chen, thank you for your continued interest. I want to discuss a starting date. Warm regards, Stella Griffin. She hit send. And just like that, something shifted. The illusion had cracked. Now it would crumble. The courtroom was colder than Stella remembered. Not physically, the heating worked perfectly, but in spirit, in the temperature of memory. It had been 2 years since she last walked through these mahogany doors, not as a visitor or someone's wife, but as Stella Griffin, attorney strategist, Storm in a silk blouse. And yet it didn't feel like a return. It felt like a rebirth. She stood in the hallway outside hearing room 4B, her palms calm, her mind razor sharp. Her hair was pulled into a sleek bun. A dark navy pantsuit tailored to perfection wrapped her like armor, and a vintage Cartier watch ticked gently around her wrist, the only piece of Dylan she had not yet removed. Not because of sentiment, because of precision. Ms. Griffin said, a junior associate from Lexington Law. They're ready for us. She nodded, her heels steady against the tiled floor. Each step down the corridor echoed like the measured beats of justice returning to its rhythm. Donovan had offered to drive her that morning. She had declined. In some wars, one walks into them alone. The atmosphere shifted when she entered. On one side, the legal team for Horizon Tech, guarded and smug. On the other hand, Bryant and Comey, led by a young partner named Marlowe, and supported by a pile of contracts and projections, none of which Stella knew could protect them from the truth she had found. She smoothed the hem of her blazer and glanced up. Her eyes met Dylan's. He had arrived moments before. His hair was tousled just enough to be fashionable, not careless. His gray suit was understated, his cufflinks unobtrusive. To the untrained eye, he looked composed. But Stella saw the tension at the corner of his mouth. There was a slight tremor in the way he adjusted his tie. He didn't expect me. Good. The proceedings began. Words floated through the air like glass blades. Breach of contract, non-disclosure violations, breach of fiduciary duty. Stella said little. She didn't need to. Her presence was a statement. When she made them, her arguments were like precision strikes, few, quiet, irrefutable. The judge adjourned the session for recess, allowing both sides to submit final documentation before the next hearing. As people rose from their seats, Stella felt a shift beside her. Dylan had crossed the room. "Stella," he said, voice low. She turned. "I didn't know you were on this case." Clearly, she replied. He looked at her, really looked. There was no wedding ring on her finger now. Her eyes no longer searched his face for warmth, only weakness. "You look different," he said softly. "I am." A pause. A breath. Can we talk? Somewhere private? Stella tilted her head slightly. I thought we said all we needed to tell the night you gave my favorite place in the world to someone else. He stiffened. She didn't care. This isn't about that, he murmured. Then it isn't worth my time, she said, turning away. He reached for her arm just a touch, but it was enough. Don't, she said. Not loud, not angry, just final. And Dylan Bryant had no words for the first time in his adult life. The windows of the Tribeca loft stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing a panorama of New York at dusk, a city slowly turning on its lights, like stars rising. Stella curled up on the sofa legs tucked under her, Donovan across from her, an open sketchbook in his lap. I saw him today, she said. Donovan didn't look up from his page. I figured. He wanted to talk. Did you let him? No. He nodded slowly. His pencil made a soft noise across the page. Was it difficult? He asked. Not as much as I expected, she answered, but not because I hate him. Donovan set the pencil down and finally looked at her. You don't hate him, but you also don't need him anymore. That made her pause. Then that scares him more than my anger ever could. Donovan didn't smile. He reached forward and gently held out the sketchbook. It was a drawing of her seated, just as she was now, wrapped in a blanket gaze, distant, strong, and soft in the same breath. Below it, he'd written a single word: resilient. Stella felt something knot inside her throat. Not grief, not pain, just release. She took the sketchbook, running her fingers across the charcoal lines. I don't know what I'm doing with you, she whispered. I don't know if I'm ready. Donovan leaned closer, not invading, just near. Then let me just be here. Not as a destination, not as a savior, just as someone who sees you clearly. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look away. The Yale library smelled of old paper and pine oil. Then, just 22. Stella collapsed on the stone steps outside after pulling 3 all-nighters preparing for a mock trial. It was Donovan who found her. Hey, he had said, crouching beside her. You're not dying because I have a midterm in 20 minutes. She had laughed, half dazed. He handed her a bottle of water and a protein bar, sat beside her for 10 minutes, said nothing else, until she asked, Why are you being nice to me? And he said, Because you look like you're trying to do everything alone, and no one should have to. Stella lay awake, and the ceiling above her was a quiet canvas. The city beyond the glass wall was a lullaby of lights. She reached over to her nightstand and opened a small wooden box. Inside, her old Yale ID, a worn ribbon from her first trial win, a ring. Not her wedding ring, but the one Dylan had given her during their engagement. Rose gold, engraved. She turned it over in her palm, then closed the box. She stood padded barefoot to the window. The wind whispered across the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, older, wiser, and far lonelier in the best way. She did not cry, because this moment, this clarity, this ache wrapped in certainty wasn't sadness. It was freedom, and she had earned it. The rain in Manhattan that morning was not a storm, but a hush. It fell with the elegance of whispered secrets, each droplet a softened truth, each puddle a mirror Stella had long learned not to look too deeply into. She stood beneath the awning of Lexington Law's main office on 43rd Street, her umbrella closed at her side, letting the cool mist touch her cheeks. Across the street, a dozen reporters swarmed the building, hungry eyes behind camera lenses, voices thick with feigned politeness and sharpened questions. It had happened. The first leak. An anonymous source had submitted internal messages from Bryant and Company to 3 news outlets. The contents were damning emails from Dylan to Sabrina, containing intimate language travel records overlapping with Stella's documented conferences abroad and expense reports that covered luxury suites in Milan and Capri under innocuous project codes. Every truth that had once felt like hers alone was now public domain. She didn't flinch. As she entered the marble lobby, the receptionist offered a soft smile, not pitying, but reverent. "They're waiting in the conference room, Ms. Griffin." The room was quiet, save for the rustle of notepads and muted phone hum. Senior partners, junior associates, PR strategists. They all turned as Stella entered. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Ms. Griffin began, Mr. Chen, the managing partner. "We've reviewed the situation. If you want to withdraw from the Bryant case, we will support you fully. The attention may become personal." Stella met his eyes. Calm, clear. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not stepping away." A pause. "This isn't revenge," she added. "It's accountability. And the moment women in my position choose silence to preserve the illusion of peace, we teach power, that it never has to answer for its betrayal." The room held its breath. Mr. Chen nodded. "Then we stand behind you." Dylan stood in his private office, blinds drawn, the city blocked out like a memory he didn't want to face. Sabrina paced behind him, bare feet against the marble, the hem of his dress shirt brushing her thighs. "They're eating us alive," she hissed. "Do you know how many messages I've gotten today? Death threats, harassment. Our pictures are everywhere." Dylan didn't answer. She walked closer. "Why aren't you saying anything?" "Do something, Dylan." He turned, slowly. His face was paler than usual, the skin beneath his eyes taut. "I told you from the beginning," he said, voice low. "This was never meant to be public." Sabrina laughed bitterly. "No. You told me I was different, that I meant more, that you weren't happy with her." "You were convenient," he replied, "and reckless." The silence between them was jagged. Then he added, "Don't confuse lust with legacy." Sabrina stared at him, stunned. And at that moment, she realized she was not the secret weapon. She was the liability. Donovan leaned back in his chair, watching the footage on his monitor with a furrowed brow. The news segments were relentless talk shows, dissecting the emails, pop culture pundits theorizing about Stella's next legal move. Clips of her courtroom presence played on loop. Camilla, his assistant, appeared in the doorway. "You said you would let me know if Ms. Griffin called." He nodded. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, he added, "Camilla." She paused. "Have you ever seen someone destroy everything they built because they didn't know how to cherish it?" Camilla tilted her head. "Is that a rhetorical question?" "Sir?" Donovan smiled faintly. "It used to be." The city pulsed beneath her balcony, vibrant and unaware of the storm brewing behind penthouse walls. Stella stood barefoot on the stone tiles, a glass of red wine untouched on the table beside her. She reread the headline, "CEO Dylan Bryant accused of misappropriation and infidelity in emerging scandal." She didn't feel vindicated, just weightless. Like a thread had been cut inside her chest. Her heart floated somewhere she couldn't reach. A knock. She turned. Donovan stood at the threshold, holding a paper bag and a warm smile. "I brought food." And silence. "Choose whichever you need." She stepped aside. Later they sat on the floor, Thai takeout between them, laughter breaking occasionally through the tension like light through a cracked ceiling. "I once thought if I worked hard enough," Stella said, staring at her chopsticks, "I could build something indestructible if I loved well enough." Donovan didn't interrupt. But people aren't buildings, she continued. They're fires. You can't make a fire stay where you want it. You can only hope not to be the one left burned. He reached out gently, brushing his fingers against hers. You weren't burned. She looked up. You walked through the fire, and you're still standing. A long silence followed. Not empty, just full. Thank you, she whispered. Donovan smiled. For what? For being here. Steady, quiet, real. He leaned forward just a little. Not enough to cross a line, but enough to let her feel the gravity between them. You're not a war to be won, Stella. You're a world. And I'd rather explore you slowly than conquer you too fast. Her breath caught. Then she smiled. You always talk like poetry. He shrugged. Bad habit. Keep it. The news broke at 8:47 a.m. A second wave. Video footage from an internal surveillance cam. Sabrina and Dylan. A hotel suite. And most damning, Dylan signing a document that redirected funds under her name. The implications were massive. The calls came quickly. First the press, then regulators, then the board. At 9:15, Dylan stood alone in his office, tie undone, the world unraveling. At 9:45, Stella stood in the Lexington lobby, phone to her ear. Yes, confirm my attendance. I'll speak at the press conference. The room was packed. Cameras, notepads, live broadcasts. Stella stepped up to the podium, elegant in a cream silk blouse and black high-waisted trousers. No jewelry, just composure. She spoke clearly, each word measured. In recent days, several private matters have become public. I did not seek the spotlight. I did not wish for a spectacle. But I will not retreat in the face of it. Flashes lit her face. This is not a tale of betrayal. It is a case of legal impropriety, financial manipulation, and a breach of ethical responsibility. And as counsel for the parties affected, I will see this through. She paused. Then, but as a woman, I hope every person watching understands silence is not strength, endurance is not loyalty, and dignity is not weakness. The room fell utterly silent, and then thunderous applause, not for the scandal, but for the woman who had become the storm. The days following the press conference unfolded like the hush before a cello's first note, tense, expectant, and filled with the stillness that felt almost sacred. Stella Griffin did not disappear into shadows or silence. She continued working, attending meetings, mentoring junior attorneys, sipping her morning coffee in the same corner of the Lexington rooftop lounge where the sun first touched the city. But something had shifted. Not in the way she moved or spoke. She was as composed as ever. No, the change was in the air around her. People no longer looked at her with whispered pity or quiet curiosity. They looked with respect, with awe, with the kind of fear reserved for people who had survived the storm but had become it. Stella stepped into the warmth of Donovan's living room, greeted by the soft scent of sandalwood and old books. A jazz record spun low in the background, and a bottle of Barolo breathed quietly on the table beside a charcuterie board he'd clearly assembled himself. She arched a brow. You've outdone yourself. Standing by the fireplace, Donovan gave her that crooked smile that always softened the lines of her thoughts. Only trying to impress the woman who made the entire eastern seaboard redefine power in heels. She laughed, gently slipping off her coat. Careful. If you keep talking like that, I expect to quote Shakespeare next. Though she be but little, she is fierce, he offered without pause. Touché. They shared a quiet moment as she stepped into the flickering light. She seemed lighter tonight, not because the weight had lifted, but because she had decided to stop carrying it like punishment. I needed tonight, she murmured, eyes on the fire. I needed to not be her for a few hours. Not the woman with the sharp answers, the tight smile, the perfect retaliation. Donovan didn't reach for her. He stepped closer, letting the warmth between them speak first. Then don't be her, he said gently. Be Stella. Just Stella. That's the version I keep falling for anyway. Her breath caught subtle but real. They stood inches apart, and it would have been so easy to kiss him, to lean forward and blur the lines that had grown increasingly soft between them. But Stella, ever deliberate, chose the space between. One day she whispered, "But not tonight." Donovan nodded, and his eyes showed no disappointment, only understanding. One day he echoed and poured her a glass of wine. Bryant sat in a private conference room atop one of the few hotels in New York that had not yet dropped him as a client. His attorney, publicist, and COO formed a semicircle around him, each looking like they'd rather be elsewhere. "The board wants a formal statement of accountability," said his COO stiffly. "Not a vague apology. Something concrete." "You want me to throw myself at their mercy?" Dillon snapped. His attorney sighed. "You no longer have the leverage to posture. Your ex-wife has it all, proof, public favor, moral standing. If you don't do something meaningful, you're not just losing your company. You're losing everything with your name on it." Dillon exhaled, rubbing his temple. The weight was different now. He'd thought he could outlast the scandal, overpower the headlines. But Stella hadn't just spoken, she had shifted the ground beneath his feet. And he hadn't expected that. Dillon had taken Stella to Iceland for their anniversary. They stood at the edge of the black sand beach, the sea wind howling like a memory. She had worn a red wool scarf, her curls wild and untamed, cheeks pink and cold. He had kissed her, like she was the only solid thing left in the world. "Do you ever worry," she had asked, "that this kind of happiness can't last forever?" He'd smiled against her forehead. "No, because I plan to keep it. Like a vow." She had believed him. How young they both were. A delivery arrived, a bouquet of white camellias and royal blue iris wrapped in parchment and tied with silver ribbon. Stella stared at it. There was no card, but she knew. Of course she knew. Camellias for regret, iris for hope. She set them aside. Not in anger, just for clarity. Camilla had insisted she come. Stella almost said no. But the gallery belonged to a friend, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the urge to stand among color. Among creation, not destruction. The space glowed with ambient lighting and minimalist arrangements. Sculptures lined the walls like frozen emotion. Paintings bled across canvas in shades of rust copper and sapphire. Stella wandered to a smaller wing drawn by instinct, and in the farthest corner hung a painting titled After. It was a woman, not painted in full, only in suggestion, her spine a curve of light, her hand reaching back toward something unseen, her eyes closed, not in fear, but in decision. Donovan appeared beside her. "She reminds me of you," he said. Stella smiled faintly. "I thought so too. The artist said it's about letting go without needing closure." She turned to him. "Do people really do that? Let go without needing an apology?" He met her gaze. "Not because they don't deserve one, but because they deserve peace more." They stood there long. The city's noise is a distant echo. Then from the entrance someone walked in. Dillon. He wore no entourage, no tailored facade, just a navy coat and a man-shaped outline of contrition. Donovan tensed. "Do you want me to?" "No," Stella said. She stepped forward, calm, composed. They met in the center of the gallery. Stella Dillon began, voice rough, eyes tired. "I don't," she said softly. "Not here. Not now." He hesitated. I just needed to say I'm sorry. Truly. She looked at him for a long time. I know, she replied. But the apology isn't the point anymore. He blinked. Then what is? She smiled a little sadly. That you thought words could undo what silence created. She turned and returned to Donovan, who was still watching from the shadows. When she reached him, she took his hand. For the first time. No hesitation, no drama, just truth. And somewhere between the sculpture of broken wings and the painting of beginnings, Stella Griffin finally let go of the sky she used to chase. Because the one above her now, it had no apologies, only stars. Late autumn swept through Manhattan with the softness of a sigh. Leaves clung to the edges of sidewalks in rust and maroon hues, and the wind carried the scent of wet stone and distant fireplaces. Stella Griffin had always adored this season, not for its melancholy, but for its honesty. Fall never pretended to be anything other than a transition, and that she understood. She sat by the bay window of Donovan's townhouse, a wool throw draped over her legs, a mug of chamomile nestled in her palms. Outside, the city pulsed in golden slivers and low rumbles, a lullaby of the familiar. But inside, it was quiet. Donovan appeared in the doorway, hair damp from his shower shirt sleeves rolled. There was something endlessly comforting about him, like this unfinished, unguarded. You didn't fall asleep on me, did you? He asked, a playful softness in his voice. Stella shook her head, her lips curving. No. I was watching the light move. He crossed the room and sat across from her. The air between them was unhurried. You've been quieter today, he said, even for you. Stella didn't answer right away. She traced the rim of her mug with one fingertip, her gaze distant. I went to see my mother this morning. Donovan stilled. How did it go? She exhaled slowly. She asked me why I stayed with Dylan as long as I did. She wasn't judging me. She just wanted to understand. Donovan leaned in slightly, but didn't interrupt. Stella looked up, her voice lower now, almost a murmur. I told her I loved the idea of being chosen for a long time. Even when I wasn't being cherished, sometimes being wanted can trick you into thinking you're whole. She paused, and when he began to drift, I thought if I loved louder, stayed steadier, and forgave faster, I could stitch the cracks back together. Donovan's brows furrowed, not in pity, but in ache. You were never the one who broke it, he said. She met his eyes. No. But I was the one who tried to pretend it wasn't broken. They walked slowly beneath trees that had surrendered their leaves to the season, their steps unhurried, unchoreographed. A cello played somewhere in the distance, a street musician near Bethesda Terrace, drawing out a lament that curled around the night like silk. Donovan offered Stella his gloved hand. She took it. My mother called you a gentleman, she said, the corners of her lips twitching. He chuckled. I'll try not to let it go to my head. She also said I seem softer lately, happier. Donovan looked over at her. And are you? She stopped walking. I think I'm beginning to be. Donovan didn't smile. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles through the glove. Then the rest can wait. The house had been loud with silence. That kind of silence that hums beneath the floorboards. His father had been gone 3 nights. His mother's wine glass left lipstick stained on every surface. Donovan had tucked his little sister into bed and told her the storm outside would pass soon, even though he didn't believe it. He'd gone downstairs to turn off the lights and found the eviction notice instead. He never forgot the sound of his mother crying behind the locked door, or how he stood there holding the paper like proof of a test he hadn't studied for. It was when he promised himself he would never need someone else to save him, and that one day he'd build a world where the people he loved didn't have to ask for protection. Stella stood in front of a classroom of law students at Columbia University, guest, lecturing on ethics and emotional neutrality in litigation. She spoke not as a name in headlines, but as a woman who had seen both sides of power. Afterwards, a student lingered behind. "Ms. Griffin," she asked softly. "Yes. Thank you for reminding us that strength doesn't have to be cold, that clarity doesn't have to be cruel." Stella smiled. "Don't let anyone make you believe that being kind makes you weak. It's not a contradiction. It's a rebellion." The girl nodded. Her eyes shone. He hadn't opened the curtains in days. Headlines had gone from scandal to mockery. Shareholders had begun voting. And Sabrina, she was gone. He sat on the edge of his bed, a glass of something brown and sharp in one hand, an old photo in the other. Stella, on their wedding day. Her smile had been full then, effortless. Before mistrust carved out its silence. He set the photo down, picked up his phone, typed. "You deserved better. I see that now. And I hope wherever you are, you know it too." He didn't send it. He just stared. Because there was nothing left to fix. Rain tapped against the windows as Stella stood barefoot, stirring honey into her tea, while Donovan flipped pancakes in a navy t-shirt and flannel pants. "This domestic side of you," she teased, "is almost too perfect." He grinned. "Don't be fooled. I burn toast with alarming frequency. You're just trying to make me feel useful." "Maybe," he said, placing a plate in front of her. "Or I want to be the kind of man who makes you feel at home no matter where we are." She looked up. There was no grand gesture, no crescendo of strings. Just pancakes, a mug of tea, and a man who saw her. It was enough, more than enough. She returned home alone. Not because she wanted distance, but because she needed a moment. To sit in the space she'd once shared with a ghost, and realize that it no longer haunted her. The flowers Dylan had sent last week were gone. The ring he gave her now rested in a velvet box in a drawer she didn't open. She sat on the couch, pulled out her journal, and wrote a single sentence. "I am not who I was, but I am still becoming." She set the pen down and smiled. There was something about early winter in New York that demanded softness. The sharpness of fall had dulled, and the city seemed to hold its breath before the first snowfall. Lights bloomed in windows like quiet promises, and the air carried that fine chill that made every breath feel like beginning again. Stella stood at the edge of a quiet bookstore on Bleecker Street. Outside, passers-by bustled with paper cups and wool scarves, the world moving as it always did. But in here, time was slower. She reached for a book, an old linen-bound collection of letters by Rainer Maria Rilke. The pages were worn, the spine softened by touch. She flipped it open halfway through, and a line caught her breath. "The only journey is the one within." "That was my favorite," came a voice behind her, low, familiar. She turned. A man stood there, older now, but unmistakably the same. Tall, warm brown eyes, a quiet gravity to his presence that hadn't changed in a decade. "Uncle Jonah," she said softly. He smiled, stepping forward to embrace her. "You're 10, and still call me uncle like 6. You disappeared," she said, her voice steadier now, though her heart wasn't. "I did, and I owe you more than just an apology." They sat in the back of the bookstore, surrounded by poetry and old jazz vinyls, playing overhead. Stella listened as Jonah Griffin, her father's estranged younger brother, unraveled the truth she had long stopped chasing. How he had walked away after the funeral because grief had carved something inside him too jagged to stay. He had watched from afar as she built a life, unsure if he still had the right to be part of it. "But I saw your face on the news," he said, his eyes wet. And it wasn't just pride. It was this aching realization that you had become the kind of woman your father always believed you would be. And I wasn't there to see it. Stella reached across the table. Then start now. Donovan was setting the table when Stella walked in, cheeks pink from the cold eyes brighter than usual. He looked up. You're glowing. I saw someone today. Someone I didn't expect. He poured 2 glasses of wine and listened as she told him about Jonah, about the stories he shared, the pictures. The silence was finally broken. Donovan didn't interrupt. He never did. When she finished, he reached for her hand across the table. Sometimes the people we lose return in versions we never imagined. And sometimes, we become the version they needed us to be all along. She leaned in and kissed him, not out of gratitude, not as a question, but as an answer. The city began to prepare for winter. Storefronts shimmered with gold garlands and velvet ribbons. Hot cider replaced pumpkin spice. And in the midst of it all, Stella found herself lighter. She attended a charity gala alongside Donovan, the first public appearance, where no one whispered about her past, but rather her future. Lexington Law offered her a partner track. Columbia University asked her to teach a complete course in the spring, and she accepted both, not because she needed validation, but because she was ready. Her father had taken her to a planetarium. She had asked why the stars seemed to move even when she was still. Because everything beautiful shifts, he had whispered. And sometimes the shift is the only proof we have that we're alive. It was his idea to drive upstate for a weekend, away from the city, away from headlines. Just trees, firewood, and time. The Mercer estate sat like a quiet cathedral among the evergreens. Modern, but warm. Full of windows. Full of ghosts Donovan had long learned to make peace with. Stella walked the grounds that first morning, her gloved hands tucked into her coat pockets. She came upon an old swing tied to an oak. Donovan said, "My sister used to spend hours there appearing beside her. Where is she now? In Berlin. Married. Happy. Still sends me postcards, even though she knows I hate reading cursive." Stella laughed. "You hate cursive, despise it, but I read every single one." They walked in silence a while longer. Then she asked, "Is this the life you imagined for yourself?" Donovan looked at her thoughtful. "Not exactly. I imagined less noise, fewer headlines, more coffee spilled on manuscripts, and less pain woven into the past." He paused. "But I never imagined you." Her breath caught. "And now I can't imagine anything else." Snow began to fall. Soft. Slow. Like forgiveness. They stood by the fire. Stella wrapped in one of his sweaters, Donovan holding her from behind their reflections dancing in the window. "Do you ever think we found each other too late?" she whispered. "No," he said. "We found each other exactly when we were finally ready." She turned in his arms. "And what are we ready for?" Donovan didn't answer with words. He kissed her with the gentleness that only came from breaking and healing and choosing again. His hands cradled her face like something sacred. And in that moment, all the noise fell away. No boardrooms, no betrayals, no before. Only now. Only this. Only them. She woke to the scent of cinnamon and the sound of vinyl playing a song her father used to hum. Donovan was in the kitchen wearing plaid pajama pants and humming off-key. She watched from the doorway, and something in her chest softened to the point of surrender. She didn't say anything. She just walked up, slid her arms around his waist from behind, and whispered into his back, "I think I'm falling in love with you." He turned slowly, eyes shining. Then, "Let me fall with you." Snow had finally settled over the city, blanketing Manhattan in a hush that only winter could command. The streets glowed in quiet elegance lights strung across brownstones, like whispered joy. It was warm inside Stella Griffin's apartment, but not overly so. The kind of warmth one earned, one invited. She stood before her bookshelf, not looking for anything in particular. Her fingers brushed worn spines, annotated margins, and folded corners. Some books she hadn't touched since law school. Others she kept simply because they reminded her of who she had been when she bought them. Then she found it. A plain manila envelope, tucked between a volume of Baldwin essays and a copy of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. There was no label, no markings, but the handwriting on the seal was unmistakable. Her father's. Her throat tightened as she pulled it free. The seal had been broken already, probably years ago. She didn't even remember placing it there. Perhaps her mind had folded the memory inward to protect her. Inside was a letter, unfinished. My dearest Star, if you're reading this, it means I never found the right moment to say what mattered. Life moved too fast. I grew too quiet. Or perhaps I didn't know how to speak honestly until I was too far from you to try. First, I want to tell you that I have watched you grow with more pride than I have ever known. You are everything your mother dreamed, and more than I ever dared to hope. I know I made mistakes in grief and silence, in shielding you from the whole truth. The truth is, Stella, not all heartbreak comes from betrayal. Sometimes it comes from love that has nowhere to go. And I never wanted you to inherit that kind of sorrow. But if you do read this one day, I want you to know this. You deserve a love that never needs mending. You deserve someone who meets you at your fullest and never once asks you to shrink. And if you ever find that love. The letter ended there. A long dash, as if he had paused and never returned. Stella stared at the paper. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from grief. She had wept enough for him in the years following his death. This was something else. This was clarity. She folded the letter gently, as if it were something sacred, and placed it in the wooden box, where she now kept only things that mattered. The ring, a ribbon, one of Donovan's postcards, and now this. 3 weeks later, on a crystalline January evening, Stella stood beside Donovan in a marble atrium, flooded with soft golden light. The air buzzed with anticipation laughter, and glasses clinking beneath crystal chandeliers. The Mercer and Griffin Foundation was a project born not of legacy, but of conviction. A joint initiative focused on pro bono legal aid mentorship for young lawyers of color and financial literacy programs for underserved communities. The name had been Donovan's idea. It should carry you forward, he'd said, not just reflect me. Stella had agreed on one condition. Then, my name goes last. Because I want the world to know I chose to build this beside you, not behind. Not beneath. As they greeted guests and accepted well wishes, Donovan leaned in. You're luminous tonight. It's the lighting, she teased. No, he said. It's peace. It looks good on you. Back at her apartment, barefoot and curled into Donovan's arms on the sofa, Stella rested her head against his chest. There was a letter, she said quietly. From your father, unfinished. But it said something that stayed with me. I deserved a love that didn't need mending. Donovan kissed her temple. He was right. She turned to face him. And you deserve someone who sees past your calm. Someone who knows when you're quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're afraid to need. He brushed a curl from her face. I'm not afraid anymore. They sat like that, in a whole silence that needed no explanation. Donovan had received a letter too, from his father, postmarked but unopened. He had left it on the mantel for weeks, unopened, untouched, as if silence could keep it from becoming real. In it his father asked to see him, terminal cancer. Weeks left. Donovan had gone, not for closure or forgiveness, but because he needed to see with his eyes that some men do not change, and that not all apologies are meant to be accepted. He returned to New York hollowed but sure, and Stella had held him without question and had asked nothing. She had said, "I'm here when you're ready." A cream-colored envelope arrived mid-February with gold trim and a familiar logo embossed on the flap. Dylan Bryant. Inside was a formal invitation to the opening of his new firm, Bryant Capital Renewal. And at the bottom, in his own handwriting, no press, no public remarks, just presence. If you can, if not, I'll understand. Stella sat with it for a full minute. Then she placed it inside the envelope again and left it by the window. Not out of resentment, but because some doors once closed must stay that way. Stella stirred from sleep, the morning light soft through the curtains. Donovan stood in the kitchen, humming, wearing her favorite worn sweater. She padded toward him barefoot. "Do you believe," she asked, "that everything happens for a reason?" He looked over. "No, but we give things meaning and choose what to do with what we've been handed, even the broken pieces, especially those." She slid into his arms, pressing her face against his shoulder. "Then we made something beautiful." He held her closer. "No," he whispered. "We are something beautiful." March arrived with a gentler breath than expected. The air no longer bit at the skin, but kissed it calm and curious. Buds began to form along the branches in Gramercy Park, and the promise of spring stirred in puddles and window reflections. Stella Griffin sat on a bench near the northeast gate, her coat unbuttoned, a leather notebook open in her lap. She was writing, not for work, not for legacy, to hear her voice again in the rhythm of pen on paper. "What are you writing?" Donovan asked as he approached, a cup of coffee in each hand, his scarf slightly lopsided. She smiled as he handed her the one he knew she preferred. No sugar oat milk, cinnamon on top. "I'm writing letters I'll never send," she said. Donovan sat beside her. "To who?" She looked straight ahead. "To my younger self. To the woman I was 2 years ago. To the version of me who kept hoping someone would choose her first." He didn't speak right away. "And what do you tell her?" Stella took a sip, then turned toward him. That she didn't fail. It was never her job to be small enough to fit someone else's fear of love. Donovan reached for her hand, kissed her knuckles without a word. The scent of roasted garlic and lemon hung in the air as the oven clicked softly behind her. Stella moved about the kitchen barefoot, wearing Donovan's gray t-shirt that hung low on her thighs. Music played from a speaker, something mellow and old with strings, and a woman's voice that ached in tune. Donovan entered carrying a small brown paper bag. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Surprise," he said, grinning. "But it comes with a condition." She paused, hand still on the ladle. "And what's that?" "You have to close your eyes." She laughed softly but obeyed. The bag rustled. His footsteps padded closer. Then, something delicate was slid onto her wrist. She opened her eyes. A bracelet. Gold, thin, understated. A single charm dangled from it, a tiny crescent moon. Stella looked up at him. "For the nights you ever feel alone again," Donovan said. "A reminder that I'm still here, even if it feels like the dark is louder than the light." She stepped into him and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. "You ruin me," she murmured in the best, slowest, most irreversible way. 2 days later, as Stella was preparing notes for her upcoming seminar, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. "Ms. Griffin, this is Dr. Levins from Midtown Diagnostics. You came in for routine blood work last week." Stella blinked. "Yes, I remember." A pause. There's nothing urgent, but I wanted to inform you directly. The results indicate early pregnancy. Congratulations. The world shifted, not shattered, not unmoored, but tilted just enough to change the horizon. Stella didn't tell Donovan immediately. She watched him instead. I watched how he leaned into her, laughter massaged her feet without being asked, and never filled silences with explanations, but with presence. She lay beside him, head on his chest, listening to his breath slow into sleep. And then, in the dark, she whispered, "You'll be someone's favorite person in the world." Donovan stirred, not fully awake. "I already am," he murmured groggily. She smiled, kissed his shoulder, and let him sleep. She had once sat in a clinic alone, hands trembling, heart in pieces. That time, the test had been negative. But she remembered the way her body had reacted, not with relief, but with grief she hadn't dared to name. She hadn't told Dylan. She hadn't trusted what he would do with that kind of hope. But this time felt different. Not because of the result, but because of who she had become in its presence. They drove upstate again. Donovan had wanted to take her to a small vineyard near Rhinebeck, a quiet retreat before her spring semester began. They walked between sleeping vines wrapped in frost. The air was cold but crisp, and she held his hand tightly, the secret still pressed close to her heart. They arrived at the cottage near dusk. The groundskeeper had already lit a fire. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted through the rooms. Donovan poured 2 glasses of wine. "To new chapters," he said. Stella raised her glass, then set it down untouched. "Donovan." He turned. She took his hands in hers, placing them gently on her abdomen. "We're going to need a 3rd glass soon." His breath hitched. Then came silence. Then awe. Then he dropped to his knees and rested his forehead against her. They lay wrapped in each other, the fire casting gold across bare shoulders and tangled fingers. "Are you scared?" he asked quietly. "Yes. But not of this. Not one of us. Just of wanting it so much." Donovan nodded. "We'll figure it out. Slowly. Honestly. Together." She brushed his cheek. "Promise me something, anything. That we will never teach this child that love must be earned. That they are not a transaction." He kissed her hand. "We'll teach them that love is an inheritance." Spring unfurled itself slowly across Manhattan, trading sharp winds for the soft weight of blossoms along the avenues. Magnolia trees lifted their arms in pale pink tulips, blushed in neat rows along Park Avenue, and the city itself seemed to breathe differently, as if remembering that even steel and stone could host renewal. Inside Stella Griffin's apartment, sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor in amber stripes. She sat at the table, hands folded over her abdomen, feeling the faintest flutter, a rhythm that wasn't yet steady, but was undeniably present. She closed her eyes. It still amazed her. After all the endings she'd endured, something could grow out of her. That after years of betrayal, silence, and survival, her body had chosen to speak life again. The kettle whistled softly. Donovan entered, tea tray in hand. He set it down carefully, as if the sound itself might disturb the tiny universe forming between them. "How are my 2 favorites this morning?" he asked, lips quirking. She smiled. "One is sleepy. The other is insufferably attentive." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'll take that as praise," they decided quietly. No spectacle. No chandeliers or flashbulbs. Just a garden in late May. Ivy curling around white trellises, strings of lights swaying overhead like captive constellations. Stella wore ivory silk, her curls crowned with tiny pearls. Donovan waited for her at the altar. No tuxedo pomp, just a tailored suit and eyes that carried the weight of every promise he was ready to keep. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered before the ceremony even began, "You are my home." Her throat tightened. "And you are my horizon." The officiant smiled, as if even they knew nothing more sacred needed to be said. They spoke vows anyway. Simple, true. Not forever in the abstract, but in the details. Promises of morning coffees, patient silences, never weaponizing absence, and making space for laughter in the middle of storms. When they kissed, it wasn't a crescendo. It was an arrival. She once wrote in her college journal, "I don't know what kind of love I want. It should make me braver, not smaller." She smiled when she found that page again weeks after the wedding. It felt like prophecy fulfilled. They spent July at a rented lake house in Vermont, far from the city's relentless hum. The water mirrored the sky, and Stella laughed more than she had in years. Donovan painted in the mornings, and pages of charcoal sketches were drying on the deck. Stella wrote letters she never planned to send. One evening, as fireflies stitched gold across the dusk, she leaned against Donovan, his arm warm around her. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "if all of this is too fragile?" He looked out at the water. "Everything worth keeping is fragile. That's why we hold it carefully." Her hand drifted to her belly rounder now. "Then promise me we'll always hold each other carefully." He kissed her temple with both hands. By September, the nursery was painted in muted tones of sage and cream. Shelves lined with books from her childhood stood beside new ones. Donovan had chosen fairy tales, fables, poetry. A rocking chair sat by the window cushions, still smelling faintly of cedar. One evening, Stella stood in the doorway, hand resting on the frame, watching Donovan assemble the crib. "You know you don't have to do it alone," she teased. He looked up, hair-mussed hands full of wooden slats. "I know, but I want to." "Why?" "Because someday when they ask me what I built with my hands, I want to point to this and say, 'A place where you first dreamed.'" Her eyes blurred. She crossed the room and kissed him before he could finish the thought. It was a December night, when the snow fell heavier than it had in years. The city seemed to fold inward, every street muffled, every rooftop carrying a white crown. Inside the hospital, Stella labored with the same quiet intensity she had carried into courtrooms and heartbreaks alike. Donovan never left her side. He held her hand through every breath, whispered strength into her ear when exhaustion clawed at her edges. And then a cry. Thin, sharp, alive. Donovan wept before he realized he was crying. Stella, sweat damp and trembling, reached out her trembling arms to gather the tiny life placed against her chest. A daughter. Skin soft as dawn, eyes blinking against the brightness of the world. "Hello, little one," Stella whispered, voice breaking. "We've been waiting for you." Donovan pressed his forehead to both of theirs. "You're perfect, both of you." The apartment no longer echoed the way it used to. It was filled with softer sounds now, the sigh of lullabies, the rustle of blankets, the small, insistent voice of a life learning to belong. One night, as their daughter slept in the bassinet, Donovan found Stella by the window, rocking gently, staring at the city lights. "You should rest," he said softly. "I can't stop looking at her." Stella whispered. "She's proof that I made it out of everything that tried to break me." He wrapped his arms around her. "She's proof that you didn't just survive. You began again." Stella turned in his arms, tears glistening. "Will I be enough for her?" Donovan said. "You're already more than enough," pressing his lips to her hair. "And she'll grow up knowing love the way it was always meant to be known." A picnic blanket stretched across the grass of Central Park. Their daughter toddled in uneven steps, chasing after bubbles that shimmered in rainbow arcs. Stella laughed, clapping softly as she wobbled and fell, only to rise again. Donovan snapped photos, his sketchbook abandoned beside him. He looked at Stella and thought she was still luminous, still carrying the fire of all the storms she had endured, yet she had found a way to turn it into warmth. As the sun dipped low, their daughter crawled into Stella's lap, sticky with jam, her small hands tugging at the charm bracelet Stella still wore. "Moon," she said in a small, confident voice. Stella kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. The moon." Donovan leaned in, wrapping his arms around them both. Stella closed her eyes, breathed deep, and knew the horizon she once feared she'd never reach was here alive, beating in her arms. It wasn't perfect. It was better, because it was chosen.